General Schwartz's long and distinguished military career culminated as the 19th Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, a career built on more than 3 decades of hands-on experience in special operations and a commitment to the OSS tradition of special operators and the intelligence community working together as a team. His dream of flying started when he was just a young boy.
Grew up in a small town in South Jersey, Toms River. At the time, it was a farming community, and the major product was eggs. People on the street watched out for kids from other families. It was a good place to grow up. My mom was ill from very early on, and so it basically was my older brother and my dad and myself. We had a small airport, the Ocean County Airport, grass strip actually. I used to ride my bicycle down to the airport periodically to go watch the Cessnas take off and land.
His dream nearly crashed before it had a chance to take off, getting into the U.S. Air Force Academy at the last minute after the candidate in front of him failed his physical.
It was a special privilege to be able to realize a childhood dream of flying airplanes, and did that for an entire career.
After graduating from the Air Force Academy and completing his pilot training, he was thrown into the fire, learning to fly during a war.
An overseas tour for a kid from a small town in South Jersey. It was an exciting time. The Vietnam situation was winding down, and ultimately the evacuation occurred in April of May of '75, and I got to participate in that. It was the conclusion of a tumultuous time. Not only were we evacuating Americans, but there were many loyal Vietnamese as well that we evacuated. I was a young co-pilot at the time, and I was flying with more experienced folks who really allowed me to gain experience during this. And I remember going into Tan Son Nhut and Benoit and spiraling down. There were lots of veterans on the machine that kept the young second lieutenant under control. Being at Clark was a maturing experience for me, flying all over the Far East and learning my trade. And came back from there to Little Rock Air Force Base in Arkansas, where I met my wife, Susie.
Khomeini demonstrators in Tehran have overrun the American embassy and now appear in control of as many as 90 American lives.
Whoever have seized the embassy there have threatened to kill the hostages if the U.S. makes any military move to rescue them.
It was another evacuation, a botched one, that had a deep impact on General Schwartz, the failed attempt to rescue the American hostages from Iran.
2 of our American aircraft collided on the ground following a refueling operation in a remote desert location in Iran.
I happened to be in Washington at the time when the Desert One mission went down. I had the opportunity to experience what a failure to perform, the consequences of that for a presidency. Being a C-130 aviator, as I was, the Cadillac of the fleet was the special ops version of the C-130. It was known as the Combat Talent. My aspiration was to the most demanding mission and the best airplane in the fleet. Ended up being a crew commander. And along the way, met a number of others in the community who ended up serving in senior positions of trust as well. These captains made a solemn commitment to themselves and more broadly that never again.
General Schwartz distinguished himself as a crew member, as an operational commander, as a joint specialty officer, and in senior command and staff at the highest levels of the military. He distinguished himself early and often as a company and field-grade officer. He rapidly advanced through aircraft commander, instructor pilot, and flight examiner duties. He has flown more than 4,000 hours in a variety of fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft.
The United States Special Operations Command came into existence, assuring that both the special operators and the intelligence community counterparts became a team again. This was vitally important. Of course, it has played out over the last 10 years in spades.
Although not directly involved in the mission, the takedown of Osama bin Laden proved to be one of his proudest moments.
It was a wonderful thing to be associated with the Joint Special Operations community, to see how this transformation occurred from the searing experience in the desert to the exhilaration 30 years later in May 2011 in Abbottabad. And neither one of the missions went exactly as planned, but the outcome was demonstrably different. It was a great achievement for the disciples of the Donovan legacy. It was a vindication, mission accomplished.
Through his entire career, Norton Schwartz produced excellence in all he did and held fast to keeping the commando promise. Promise made, promise kept. He kept this promise both in primary special operations roles and in supporting roles in command and on the Joint Staff as J3 and Director Joint Staff.
The J3, the operations officer of the American Armed Forces, the toughest job I had ever. Afghanistan was occurring. We were preparing for Iraq at the time. Very, very busy job and a very stretching job. Not enough hours in the day to be the J3. I became the director of the Joint Staff following the J3 tenure. The director's job is essentially a chief of staff to the chairman. I think it prepared me well for the future positions, both at Transcom and subsequently as the chief.
Set to retire from the military in 2008, Defense Secretary Robert Gates instead recommended that President Bush nominate General Schwartz for the Air Force's top job, making him the first Chief of Service from Special Operations.
The culmination of their career was as the Chief of Service for our Air Force. To complete one's tenure as a Chief of Service is an incredible honor. And this was something Susie and I did together as we had all the previous tours as well. It's an interesting thing about military families. It's a team sport, and so I owe a great deal to my girl.
General Schwartz took over as chief after his predecessor had been fired.
It was an exciting time. The nuclear enterprise was clearly the principal focus at the outset and took that on aggressively. While close combat is still the fundamental ethic of the armed forces, remote combat has its place. The necessity for the application of this new technology was clearly evident. Who else but the Air Force to best integrate manned and unmanned on the battlefield?
And probably the reason that Norty is getting this Donovan Award is because of the great work that Norty did on the drone program. Bill McRaven and I have been recipients of the Donovan Award, largely, I'm sure, because of the bin Laden raid. We could not have done that bin Laden raid were it not for the help of Norty's pilots. And more importantly, as CIA director, I can tell you we would not have been able to decimate al-Qaeda's leadership were it not for the great work of those pilots, and they continue to do great work. You know, they're not flying in F-16s, but let me tell you, they are just as effective at taking terrorists off the battlefield. And for that, Norty deserves tremendous credit. So congratulations, Norty. You are a great man, a good friend, a dedicated officer, but more importantly, a great patriot who has truly done his best in protecting the United States of America. God bless you.
One of General Donovan's characteristics was courageous leadership. And I think Norty demonstrated that in a number of ways. First, he took his job as Chief of Staff of the Air Force under difficult circumstances. I had just relieved his predecessor and the Secretary of the Air Force for problems in the nuclear enterprise. And taking that on was a difficult moment in the Air Force under those circumstances. He also became Chief of Staff at a time when the United States was fighting two wars, and the Air Force was stretched very thin in providing support both of the ground support of the forces on the ground, but also the logistics support for carrying on 2 wars in very distant places. He also showed courageous leadership in the budgetary stresses that the Air Force was going through at a time of needed modernization, but also of budget stringency in Washington. Finally, I think Norty is just a great leader. He was great to work with, and I'm confident that General Donovan would be very proud to see General Schwartz receive the award named in his honor.
Being a Donovan Award winner is a highlight of a career of public service. To be identified with someone who established the boundaries of what we do even today.
His career and the lessons he learned from it will be shared in his forthcoming book, Journey, Memoirs of an Air Force Chief of Staff. The 2016 William J. Donovan Award recipient, General Norty Schwartz.